Thank you so much for meeting with us today. So, this
Of
is
course.
one of the Japan Society of Boston's member highlights. So, our first question is how long have you been a member of the Japan Society of Boston? And then, more generally, how did you come across us and what drew you to us?
So my name is Remy. I suppose I've been a member of the Japan Society of Boston for a solid year because that's the time when I started hosting the JSB Book Club or volunteering with that. But I had been going to events since 2019, like since I finished with my undergraduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what drew me to the society, when I was doing my undergrad, I did it at like a kind of small technical school.
Hmm.
And there, like I've been cultivating this interest on my own in Japan and Japanese culture and language, literature, etc. But there weren't many outlets at my school to like really dive into it. So after college, I was looking for some kind of community where I could share my interests with people and kind of continue to explore my interests. So
Hmm.
I think that was really the draw for me. It's I had this interest in Japanese culture that I wanted to explore with other people. So
Hmm.
pretty straightforward.
So, in terms of like where that sort of like spark for Japanese culture came from, where do you think that did that just come naturally, or when did that
Oh
sort of
man.
first come about?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like in one way or another, I feel like I've interacted with Japanese culture for a lot of my life. I mean, even just growing up in America, like for example, a lot of video games are from Japan. A lot of television that people watch, especially these days, like anime is from Japan. So I think that like since I was a kid, I've always been exposed to this kind of culture. And then it occurred to me that like there was something kind of interesting, particularly in like the way that stories are told in Japan. I think I picked up on it for like video games and TV, but then I started reading Japanese literature, and that's really when I had like a deep dive into it, and I decided like, okay, I want to like spend a significant amount of time like studying this and learning about it. And then from the literature, it became an interest in the culture, and then I wanted to read the books in the original language, so I started learning, Japanese properly, and that's
Hmm.
kind of where it went from.
So, beyond Japanese culture, what else are you passionate about? And do you think there are any connections between Japan and your other interests, or are they still pretty disparate?
Ah, that's a good question. So I don't actually currently live in Boston. I live in New York because I'm completing a degree in mathematics at Columbia. So I would say that is my main interest by far, mathematics.
Hmm.
Um, Beyond that, I'm interested in literature generally. So certainly my interest in literature overlaps with my interest in Japan because one of the primary reasons I'm interested in that culture is because of the literature.
Hmm.
Beyond that, though, like believe it or not, like coming out of like post-war Japan, there was an entire generation of Japanese mathematicians who basically led the way in the areas of math that I'm quite interested in, particularly algebraic geometry and some of these
Hmm.
related fields. So actually,
Hmm.
you'd be surprised. There's more overlap than you think between just like mathematics and Japanese culture. In particular, there are like some groundbreaking papers that people continuously talk about that were published in a relatively unknown Japanese journal, like the Tohoku Journal or something. So
Hmm. You had just mentioned how you've been volunteering with the JSB Book Club. So, do you mind telling us a little bit about how you got involved in that and what you do for the book club?
yeah, yeah, sure. So as I said, starting a year ago, I've been volunteering to help host it, um, along with Naoko, who's kind of like the head organizer. I would say the two main things I do is I I suppose so we have I would say bi-monthly meetings, and at each meeting we'll pick a novel, we'll read it together, and then we'll discuss it for a couple hours. So I suppose my primary role is to just like keep the conversation going on those and
Hmm.
make sure that there's like topics and discussion questions and that everybody gets a chance to say something. But the things that everybody's super nice and has really insightful things to say, so I have to do almost nothing, honestly. And then and that's just shows how great people are. But
Hmm.
beyond that, I also help to curate and select the books for each year. Usually at the beginning of the year, we'll select the lineup for the year, and I try to like pick a wide range of books. I think we focus mainly on like the modern era or like past the Meiji Restoration.
Hmm.
Um, but like that kind of capture a wide berth of what makes Japanese literature so interesting. So
Great.
yeah.
What do you think? What are like some examples of the books that you guys are reading, or like your favorite sort of one of the things you guys have studied in the book club?
Oh man. Okay. So the last book that we read was Villain. It was almost like a non-thriller crime thriller. Like it's the kind of thing where you know almost immediately who the murderer is, And like the book, while at face value seems like a crime thriller, is really just an excuse to take a slice of life in Japan and I suppose the early 2000s.
Mhm.
And that was a phenomenal book. It was very interesting. Like the discussion was more about like the culture of Japan at the time. Personally, my favorite author is Yukio Mishima, and I think before I was running it, but I think last year we did the Temple of the Golden Pavilion, and that was phenomenal.
Mhm.
But you know,
Mhm.
like Mishima like writes um, in a very intense way, in a very negative way, and I kind of feed off of that, so I quite like it.
Right.
Another personal favorite, I think we read Woman in the Dunes by Kobo
Mhm.
Abe, and that's just a phenomenal book, and it comes with a phenomenal film as well.
Mhm.
There's an experimental film from the '60s, which is really
Right.
great. But just
Mhm.
off the top of my head, those are a few that I've really enjoyed.
Do you think you have any favorite event or program that you've either hosted or attended within JSB?
It's a very good question. I mean, of course, I'm going to pick the JSB Book Club. I mean, like my passion for Japanese culture is pretty broad, but like it's I think it's mostly focused in like literature and language. So of course that's kind
Mhm.
of what I'm drawn to. But you know, beyond that, so when I was still in Boston and before coronavirus, I remember there'd be live events at JSB, and I remember in particular there was like an onigiri event where we learned how to like make our own onigiri, and
Right.
I went with a bunch of students from like Showa Daigaku. You know, I think they've got like a
Mhm.
satellite campus
Mhm.
in Boston, and I have very fond memories of that in particular. So yeah,
Right.
beyond the book club, anything with food and community, friends. Yeah,
All right. So our last question is, what would you say to somebody who is considering joining JSB?
I would say that if you have any interest in Japanese culture at all, even a passing one, I think it's worthwhile to at least try some of the events at JSB. I think that this really is like if you're in the New England area or the Boston area, like this is the place to go to continue to cultivate those interests uh, and whatnot. I mean, like even anecdotally, like my mother, inspired by me, I suppose, started to take like introductory Japanese lessons, and she just had like a passing interest, right? So
Mhm. Right.
yeah,
Got it. Mhm.
I would say yeah, if it's really a great place to cultivate your interest in Japanese culture, and yeah, it's a
Awesome.
great community as well.
Mhm. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.